Everybody's got their coffee and juice. All right. Well, good morning and welcome to the Center for the National Interest. For those who don't know me, I'm the moderator for today. My name is Harry Kazianis. I'm Director of Defense Studies here at the Center. I also am the Executive Editor of the National Interest, which is our publishing arm. Thanks for joining us today. I think it's obviously a very timely time for this sort of event with North Korea, everything that's going on. I don't know if you guys have seen the statements coming out of North Korean media today. I will read you one to sort of get a sense of where we are because things are moving obviously very, very quickly. So I think just to sort of set the scene and kind of give everybody an idea of where we are with everything, obviously we had South Korea's president here in Washington for, I don't even really describe anything else but a lightning summit. Very interesting sort of press event in the Oval Office where I think a lot of questions I think we're all asking were sort of rehashed and sort of delineated a little bit, and I think we're left with probably even more questions today than we ever had when it comes to North Korea. But I think this weekend we might get some clarity as to what's going on. There's reports in the Washington Post, other outlets, that apparently North Korean officials and Trump administration officials will meet in Singapore to talk about the agenda for the proposed summit. Perhaps the deliverables of everything that's going on. But I want to read something that wrote last night in North Korean media that's just very interesting. You might have missed this because it was about 9:30. I know people like to go to bed a little early. Maybe some of the people who stayed a little later caught this. But I'm going to read this because I think this might change our calculus on some things. And I never like to read into North Korean media, but I think this one's kind of interesting. And I'm quoting, "We will neither beg the U.S. for dialogue nor take the trouble to persuade them if they do not want to sit together with us," obviously talking about the summit. "Whether the U.S. will meet us at a meeting room or encounter us at a nuclear-to-nuclear showdown is entirely dependent upon the decision of the U.S. I'm going a little bit further. To borrow their words, we can also make the U.S. taste an appalling tragedy and has neither experienced nor even imagined up until now." Well, I don't know about you guys, but it doesn't really sound like they're too interested in the summit. But again, this is the North Korean media. It has a lot of bombast, a lot of hot rhetoric. But that rhetoric has sort of cooled down in the last couple of months as we've been talking about a summit. So I think the questions here are pretty obvious of what we're talking about. I think the first one is there actually going to be a summit? If there is a summit, will Kim agree in some sort of concrete fashion to give up his nuclear weapons? What does Kim get if he gives up his nuclear weapons? Would Washington take something less? I know there's been a lot of talk about the North Koreans sort of giving up all of their nuclear weapons en masse, and then the sanctions come off and there's some sort of economic investment. But would the Trump administration take some phased approach or step by step? I know the president was on Fox and Friends this morning in a taped interview with Brian Kilmeade, and it seemed like he could be possibly persuaded to go in that direction, but it was sort of vague, so we're not really sure. But I think probably the most interesting question of all is, what happens if there is no summit? Where do we go from there? Are we back on the brink of potential armed conflict? Do the North Koreans potentially start testing missiles? I mean, even just now, as we're meeting here today, the North Koreans are, quote unquote, dismantling their nuclear proving grounds. So I think the questions here are very obvious, and hopefully these great experts can sort of get to the heart of a lot of these different things. So that's basically where we are. So I want to just take time and introduce our first speaker. The way these panels go, it's pretty straightforward. We talk each for about 10 minutes, then we get to a Q&A, and we'll wrap this up by about 11:30. Obviously, we are on the record here, so just keep that in mind. So with that, our first speaker who's going to solve all our problems for us and give us a great South Korean perspective is Dr. Heung-Kyu. And I apologize if I butchered your name there. He's a visiting fellow at Georgetown University and a policy advisor to the South Korean Presidential Security Council and Presidential Unification Advisory Council, as well as the director of the China Policy Institute at Ajou University. Professor, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here, and also to see you prestigious people in Washington D.C. Even though I am part of the Presidential Commission for Policy Planning and then also the National Security Council, but today's what I say is not representing the Korean government, but my personal This is the for sure. And then and also it's wonderful to see my old friend of mine, Scott Snyder, who I always pay great respect to his jobs, and then also the other people. I just read your names in the journal and then newspapers, so it's a great honor. Thank you for the wonderful opportunity for me to have. Okay, today's topic is about the RUG-U.S. summit and then its implications in the future. South Korea is just a middle power, located and bridged in between continental and maritime powers. Due to the geographic feature, Korean Peninsula has always been a locus of great powers competitions and become a kind of sacrifice during the power transition in this region throughout history. There are so many cases. And also now we face the Five Guys. You can imagine, which is not the name of the restaurant, delicious. And, you can imagine those faces of Five Guys. First Trump, and then Abe Shinzo, and Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin, and also Kim Jong-un. They are very charismatic, and then also straightforward.
Wow.
That changes my thoughts.
There we go. All right.
Do we keep going here?
Even more than,
Or did you plan this?
I did. Me and the president talked this morning. We did that.
Okay. They are straightforward and then very capable. So it's extremely difficult for us to deal with them, and then also we face extremely difficult security environments and uncertain, and then also in Korean's perspective, unstable. South Korea now faces multiple challenges around the Korean Peninsula, and the first one is the rising U.S.-China rivalry, and also extensions to on the Korean Peninsula, and then also U.S. America First strategy, and also alliance issues coming up ahead of us, and including the THAAD issues. And the third one is China's rise, and then also economic restructuring, and then also their new strategy of road and belt strategies. And North Korea's security threat, including the nuclear development, and then sixth, Japan's normalization, seventh, economic recession, and then the last three, potential breakout of terrorism in the Korean Peninsula as well. But among these issues, the most challenging issue is North Korea's nuclear threat. We face an existential threat from the North Korea's growing nuclear weapon capabilities. North Korea's nuclear crisis evolved into four features. First one is politicization of the involved countries. It means it is heavily influenced by domestic politics, even including North Korea. North Korea, particularly Kim Jong-un, seems to get the power tight grip, but still he has a weak legitimacy compared to his predecessors, and also complication, internationalization, damaging the regime, and then also international order, and then also the third one is North Korean nuclear issues, a kind of prolonged nature. And then the fourth one is brewing a kind of crisis for military clashes. There are three choices to deal with North Korean nuclear crisis. First one is, of course, resolution through peaceful means, which the President Moon Jae-in is pursuing now, and then also the Trump. But now we witness what happened. The second one is the forcing North Korea to give up its nuclear capabilities through international sanctions. The third one is destroy the North Korean nuclear facilities through military means. Of course, the most favorable option for South Koreans and maybe other, some people must be the first option. That's why we are, working really hard on these first options. But the other two options still, remains. Windows of opportunity to resolve the issue of North Korea nuclear by peaceful was option due to the following factors. First one is the stronger sense of urgency to denuclearize North Korea in international societies. North Korea already declared the completion of their nuclear, project. And then second one is a hydrogen bomb and ICBM tests catalyzed the stronger U.S.-China joint reactions against North Korea. Third one is, of course, Trump factor, which is still maybe the most important now, I guess. And the fourth one is the North Korea's Pyongyang line under stress. Security effects of nuclear armaments was neutralized due to the stronger U.S. extended deterrence and then also South Korea's military buildup. And then also economic effects of nuclear armaments are not materialized due to the both stronger economic sanctions and continued military inputs, ironically weakening, Kim Jong-un's legitimacy in the long run. And then also Kim Jong-un's dialogue proposal of the 2015, 16, and then 18 will also be raised again. And then fifth factor is Moon Jae-in's engagement process, of course, to North Korea. And Moon Jae-in consistently adopt a policy of no observation and peaceful coexistence and prosperity, and gradual unification by peaceful means at the expense of Moon's domestic political costs. And also, he drew, new economic, plans to help North Korea if North Korea abide by international norms and also denuclearize. But it hasn't been realized, and also they consistently pursue the non-political exchanges and cooperation projects. And then Moon Jae-in tried to suggest if you really, cooperate with us, and we will provide that amount of, that kind of projects. Okay, and then by result of these kind of efforts, we already, hold the South-North Korean summit on April 27th. There were three parts, and the first one is seeking for comprehensive and dramatic improvements of the development of the relationship in these two countries, and also the reduction of military tension and removal of war threat measures. And the third one is establishment of the perpetual and sturdy peace regimes. And but if we evaluate the outcome of the South and North Summit, and there is no big changes and details in Kim Jong-un's given positions in the documents. And however, a kind of formation of a considerable level of trust between the leaders, South and North Koreans, and dramatically increased and also became the basis of South Korea's bridging role between the United States and North Korea. And then Kim Jong-un hopes to shift the policy focus to economic development and the completion of a parallel line of military and economy. And then also Kim's confidence on domestic politics and then is showed. And then also he seeks to strengthen the international capacity left over for the U.S.-North Korean summit. And then fifth, North Korea hopes China to play limited roles. Maybe yes for the end of armistice, but not for peace treaty. And the sixth one is the gradualist and salami tactics he adopted. And then also he looks for the kind of compromise to keep nuclear capabilities of the past while giving up nuclear capabilities of the present and the future, and maybe ICBM. And also Kim Jong-un aims for the changing images and reducing pressure of the economic sanctions, enlarging diplomatic space between the United States and China, and taking lead on the Korean issues. I think that Kim Jong-un already achieved most of objectives even before we held a kind of the U.S. and North Korean summit. And so his spaces of choices are much larger than Trump. So even though he failed to have a U.S. North Korea summit, he can declare the success. And but Trump must be successful if he hold a summit. Since then, there are four important events happening, and the first one is Bolton's announcement of the revamp model adapt to the this negotiation, and also Kim Jong-un's sudden visit to China. And the third one is Pompeo's visit to Pyongyang, and the fourth one is North Korea's sudden criticism over the United States, and then also which of course drove more attention to the South Korea and the U.S. summit, and then also the Trump's response. Trump just got showed his response. And okay, you 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, thank you. So this time, President Moon's visit to the United States has some objectives, and the original proposal is to assure South Korea's interest in the summit. And second one is talks about the details of the give and takes in the process of denuclearization. Third one is discuss how to build a peace regime. But because of the current situations, evolved, and then maybe there was a change of objectives due to the tension between the United States and North Korea. The most important role he trying to is to play the good communicator between the Kim Jong-un and Trump to realize the summit. And the second one is being more acquainted with Trump and his aide. That's why he tried to meet Bolton and Pompeo. And but evaluation, I can say half of success, and then but more political risks he got. And then what he successes, but now it turns out failure. But it maintained the kind of momentum for summit. And Trump suggested the Trump model instead of a revamp model, and the security guarantee and the economic aids at the expense of the SCBID. S means I think speedy. Trump needs a speedy CBID. And then also the Moon Jae-in got the homework to persuade Kim to accept the U.S. conditions. As I mentioned, the speedy CBID, probably by 2020. And no detailed guarantees from Trump, and the threat of possible withdrawal from the summit. So the outcome is I really saw the half and half to hold the summit, but now it turns out the disastrous. Okay.
Well, thank you, Professor. I appreciate you doing that under some interesting circumstances, nonetheless. So let me just ask you a question. I'm sure everybody that that's here is probably dying to ask. How is Seoul going to look at this? I mean, again, I know snap reaction. Not knowing everything that's happening. I know you're not speaking for the government, but what do you think Seoul's take is going to be on this?
I think Seoul got particularly Moon Jae-in got tremendous, domestic cost, first of all, and then after meeting the Kim Jong-un and then also the Moon Jae-in's envoys after visiting Pyongyang, seems to be quite optimistic, and then also there is the only option for Seoul to pursue to resolve these issues. I mean, peaceful means. That's why they invested so much political, cost and then also the other kind of asset. But now it turns out failure. And then but Moon Jae-in was quite cautious actually. He's a centrist, even though his aide and then other people were quite avid for furthering the negotiations and then also be patient to the North Korea's demands. But so that's why Moon Jae-in continued to be moderate, and then also they're telling people we are ready for other alternatives, and also in fact there's a kind of hidden secret. We are trying to reform our military capabilities as a low key, and so we continue to do. And then it's the worst scenario. We have to prepare for fighting against or protecting us. So that's why and Moon Jae-in is quite serious in spite of the kind of rapprochement with North Korea, but Moon Jae-in still continued to launch the kind of military reform seriously, even though it didn't.
So Anthony, help us out here. Help us figure all this out. So summit is dead for now. Where does this go from here for the Trump administration? Where are we back on the brink of conflict? Does the North Koreans start testing missiles again? I know this pretty much blows up your presentation, so do the best you can. And just as a planning note, we're going to end at 11. We want to be respectful of everybody's time, and obviously a lot's going on now, so just keep that in mind. Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, thank you to the Center for inviting me. It's an interesting day, as it always is on North Korea policy. I would say, obviously I was going to talk a little bit about summit strategy, so we don't have to talk about that. X that part out. But I'm the max pressure guy, so I have plenty to say about what comes next. I would just say, just sort of why this happened, in my view, is that, prior to a week ago, when we started to get these inflammatory statements from North Korea, the previously positive optics really hid a serious substantive difference, right? The difference being denuclearization. And when you have one side that says that they want phased denuclearization, which I would editorialize and say is part of the history of our failed interactions with North Korea, where North Korea's obligations are backloaded and the U.S. and our allies' obligations are front-loaded. I think in the mind of this administration, that's a recipe for failure. And when this administration, to anyone who is listening, was telegraphing that we were going to do something different. And for anyone who wasn't watching the last 15 months of this administration, that thought that somehow this administration was going to sit down and come up with the same bad deal that 3 of its predecessors have, clearly wasn't watching. And I think the North Koreans at some point expected that the U.S. would revert back to form. So it's not really surprising, because the substantive differences were so great that they likely wouldn't have been bridged even at a head of state level meeting. So for me, max pressure, maximum pressure, where do we go from here? I think that, when I started, when I left government over a year ago, 15 months ago, I think the conversation was basically, North Korea is sanctioned out. Of course, there's not much more that we can do, and that's clearly not the case. And I would say that right now, there's a lot more that the Trump administration could be doing. They deserve a lot of credit for where they've moved North Korea sanctions to. The U.S. Has used UN sanctions in a creative way, I think, to steadily increase the pressure and restrictions on all aspects of North Korea's weapons program, but also certain commodities, which I think is a new area for us to focus on. But the important aspect on that is that the U.S. used UN sanctions as the solid foundation on which to build additional U.S. sanctions that went beyond the UN restrictions, which was part of the successful sanctions campaign against Iran. That's how it was done. The maximum pressure campaign, as I just noted, is similar to Iran, and it's really one simple mission statement. You can do business with the United States, or you can do it with North Korea, but you can't do both. But the key to willingness for partners to participate in that mission statement is that you have to back it up with real consequences if persons continue to do business with North Korea. And I would say, I'm sure everybody here would say, not surprisingly, China plays a key role in that, given its overwhelming influence on North Korean trade and now its renewed political influence. So from my perspective, Beijing has had to be coerced into sanctions implementation. They spent a decade voting for UN resolutions that they violated just as soon as they got back to Beijing. So I think they expected the Trump administration to follow his predecessor, and frankly his predecessor before that, his last two predecessors' approach to North Korea and to Chinese interests, and to not target Chinese interests and to sort of pull back from that. But I think, again, here, the Trump administration deserves credit. They sanctioned a small Chinese bank, they sanctioned Chinese companies and individuals, and threatened to sanction even more. By all accounts, Chinese compliance has increased. I will say we've seen some reporting recently, especially after that second Kim-Xi summit, that some of that sanctions implementation has reduced, but we'll see what happens now without a summit. From my perspective, Beijing's outsized role in sanctions implementation, while I just noted, can be a benefit. It also could be a liability because they can release the sanctions on North Korea whenever they choose, and that's certainly a concern. So, next steps. I originally wrote this in a when the summit fails or if the summit doesn't happen. So now next step, and luckily I've already written a very long paper on what comes next, so which is in the editing process. So hopefully that'll come out soon. But this is a little snapshot. The max pressure sanctions framework remains for rapid resumption and intensification of the maximum pressure campaign. I think if you come away with one thing, from this talk is that this is not a situation where we go back and we plateau. There's a lot more that can be done. When I sat down, because I think a lot about maximum pressure, amongst other things, when I sat down and I thought about maximum pressure, I came up with 16 recommendations, which really only scratches the surface. And my paper doesn't cover all 16, so don't worry. It's already long enough, it only covers 6. But I'm going to talk about 2 here. The first is the U.S. needs to do more to stop Chinese banks from facilitating North Korea's sanctions evasion. A report came out that late last year, the Trump administration was close to sanctioning 2 Chinese banks, the Agricultural Bank of China and China Construction Bank, 2 large banks, but feared the impact on the U.S. economy. Unfortunately, in my view, the debate on North Korea, or excuse me, on Chinese banks helping North Korea has been framed in a status quo or sanctioning them to the point where they have no access to the U.S. financial system, which having worked on Iran sanctions, I think is the wrong way to look at it. If we look at the Iran sanctions playbook from 2012 to 2015, the U.S. issued over $12 billion worth of fines against European financial institutions for Iran sanctions violations. From my perspective, that's what we should be doing against Chinese banks. That's really the starting point. We may get to a point where we have to cut these banks out from the U.S. financial system because they are violating U.S. law, but I don't think we should start with that, at least at this point. The second thing I'll talk about is North Korean laborers. I think it's pretty clear that a lot of us have been saying that North Korean laborers, the money goes back to the regime and they use that revenue for its weapons program. It's nice to see the UN Security Council in a unanimous vote say that's exactly what's going on. And so this is when I talked about the UN Foundation and the U.S. stronger U.S. sanctions, this is another example of that. UN sanctions only require countries to kick out North Korean laborers by December 2019. U.S. sanctions, mandatory sanctions, require sanctioning those who employ North Korean laborers right now. So, for the Trump administration, especially since, again, this is something that North Korea probably gets close to $500 million a year for its weapons programs, the Trump administration could say to countries, if you're going to continue with these laborers, then we are going to sanction you. And hopefully the countries will look at this and say, this is really slave labor in our time, and we shouldn't be using these persons for that purpose. Well, I had a conclusion that said the Trump administration has the advantage in the talks, knowing the sanctions are hurting the regime and there's more room to grow, which is true. And I will just say that now I think that I think the danger here for the Trump administration is China. I think that despite the suggestions that the South Koreans will loosen sanctions during their talks with North Korea, I wouldn't be surprised if that track also stops the inter-Korean track. The key in my mind now is China, and making clear to the leaders in Beijing that if they side with North Korea, that there is going to be some pain against their banks and their interests that will hopefully bring them back into the fold.
Thank you, Anthony. Let me just ask you a quick follow-up question. So where do you think the trade negotiations with Beijing fit into all of this? Because there's a lot of speculation, a lot of talk that maybe the Chinese are sort of using North Korea as sort of some leverage in these talks. I find it very interesting that Kim Jong-un goes to Dalian, second summit with Xi Jinping, supposedly to go see China's new aircraft carrier. And then, at least, there appears to be a little bit of change in tone from the North Koreans. Do you think China had some impact there? Could they be using them as sort of a piece of leverage?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think that coming out of that summit, it felt like perhaps Kim got a guarantee from President Xi that said, keep pushing on phased denuclearization, and if you keep doing that, we will relieve sanctions. And not to throw another issue with China in there is Iran, because by this fall, I think it is, countries that import oil from Iran are going to have to start reducing. Otherwise, they will face sanctions from the United States, and I think that China will have to be one that will reduce their import of Iranian oil. So that's another sort of factor in this whole relationship with China.
The questions just multiply. All right. Well, thank you, Anthony. So, General Gregson, our Senior Director for China in the Pacific here at the Center, former Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Obama administration, former Commander of U.S. Marines in the Pacific. Sir, save this for us. Where do we go from here? What is? I know you had an excellent presentation you were going to give, but kind of give us a sense.
It depends on what the definition of here is. Bottom line, since Harry invited me to dash to a conclusion, is our policy requires a lot more deep thinking. We're ignoring a lot of embedded contradictions here in pursuit of perhaps the wrong goal. Achieving a lasting settlement of the Korean War would be a good thing. That's pretty unobjectionable. The ready, fire, aim summit's not necessarily a bad thing. Conventional diplomacy from retired presidents visiting North Korea, then 4-party talks, then 6-party talks, negotiations, agreements, money, light water reactors, all these things have led to a cycle of sanctions and repeat rinse and 3 administrations now, as Anthony said. Is the summit now too big to fail? Maybe. And predictions of, I know all our media dashed out here, but predictions of delay and cancellation might be merely negotiating ploys and political hype. Remember, it's all about the ratings, and we're all falling for it because we follow every utterance. And maybe our statements should be treated like wine, that they're not any good until they age for a while, and make sure that we mean what we say. Well, what are we facing? Kim understands the value of nuclear weapons. He understands their high value in their potential, and he also, we hope, understands that they're worse than useless in use. And with his nuclear weapons capability, he's now gained 3 summit meetings, the PRC twice, the ROC, and then now perhaps the U.S. Kim wants nuclear weapons, and he wants to be treated as a nuclear weapons state, and he wants to play the large powers off against each other. He wants to particularly weaken U.S. ties to Japan and Korea and decrease U.S. presence on the peninsula. And ultimately, he wants to unify Korea on North Korea's terms. That's been a Kim family goal since grandfather. In the near term, Kim, if he enters into discussions at all, intends to enter prolonged discussions over nuclear weapons and to structure the talks in the manner established in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty discussions. In other words, keep talking out into the next century somewhere, but keep talking and he keeps nuclear weapons. Their stated position has been denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, defined as applying to all nuclear-capable forces on the peninsula. And guess who that is? The basic nature of the North Korean regime is impossible to change without regime change. It's a totalitarian state. The whole apparatus exists to serve the Kim family regime, defined as the Kim family and approximately 1 million or so core supporters who must be kept satisfied, hence the vulnerability to sanctions. The nation of North Korea, the population, is in reality hostage to the ruling clique. North Korea, to continue a theme that's been mentioned, North Korea survives through sovereign criminality or criminal sovereignty, whichever you prefer. North Korea's Central Committee Bureau 39 is an active participant in the criminal economy of the region, with tentacles extending well beyond Asia. North Korea's global presence, overt and clandestine, generates resources to provide critical funding streams for military programs and regime supporters, and these illicit enterprises most specifically include nuclear proliferation for profit. North Korea organizes its legitimate activities behind the shield of sovereign immunity and military coercion while using the tools of the state to perpetuate these schemes abroad. Therefore, the Kim family regime is not subject to the usual incentives, threats, and blandishments of conventional diplomacy. President Moon has got a terrific problem. North Korea's charm offensive was successful. Kim Jong-un's approval rating in South Korea reached 78% after the Olympics. President Trump's approval rating in South Korea, by comparison, is less than 20%, according to the Pew organization. President Moon said he will change the constitution of the ROK to achieve North-South federation. China has its own set of vital, or core, as they say, interest in North Korea. China wants a unitary Democratic People's Republic of Korea on its border. It does not want a democracy on its border. It most definitely does not want U.S. forces on its border. North Korea's nuclear weapons are a means to that end. China would welcome any collateral damage out of all this to the U.S. alliance structure. And many assume, as Harry stated, that backing away from sanctions on ZTE and backing away from a, quote, easy-to-win trade war, unquote, are a quid for China's support. There's threats here to the ROC alliance, ROC-U.S. alliance, and the U.S.-Japan alliance. With or without a summit, the DPRK and Kim will claim that his sincerity and reasonable offers were rebuffed. A separate peace with the ROK could be possible. It's also possible that the U.S. will agree to limits on North Korea's intercontinental ballistic missiles to reduce the threat to the U.S. as a face-saving result of this summit. That would leave Japan exposed to medium and short-range ballistic missiles and WMD. Human rights and regime change play into this. The Kim family regime maintains its power through systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations against its own people. And according to the UN, these violations in many instances constitute crimes against humanity. The penal colony is said to hold over 120,000 political prisoners. Victor Cha estimates that over 1 million prisoners have been killed over the duration of the Kim family regime. Kim knows we know this. How long does Kim think we would keep our word to ensure their safety and security if he denuclearized with his human rights record? And how does North Korea and South Korea federate with this kind of gross human rights violation going on in North Korea? That's not clear. I'm also a fan of maximum pressure sanctions, but we have to be clear about what we're talking about. Maximum pressure, by definition, is designed to change regime behavior and therefore hazard regime change, which we in the same breath say we're not after. Heretofore, the U.S. and our allies have been unwilling to force regime change, and China knows this. There's only two possibilities with sanctions at any given moment. They're either tightening or loosening. They never remain static. You just can't impose them and then we're done with that problem. We don't have to worry about it because we're working against thinking, mendacious, devious enemies, and they will find holes in the sanctions. They will work to loosen the sanctions. If we're not working to tie up these loose ends, if we're not working to tighten the sanctions, they by definition are loosening and becoming irrelevant. Each administration since 1991 has applied sanctions and declared that this time they'll be effective, and they haven't been. The North Koreans attending the Winter Olympics included sanctioned individuals, yet Kim won the charm event. Recently, China increased its crude oil exports and accepted more North Korean female workers after the second Kim-Xi, no pun intended, meeting. But both were violations of the existing sanctions that we had underway. So if we're going to do maximum pressure, there's a lot of work we need to do to make sure it's maximum. Summit or no summit, after 12 June, the issue is going to remain. Allies and friends and China will need to see that our security guarantees are real and not merely rhetorical. And the national leaders of Japan and Korea must be able to show their constituents that positive, effective actions are taken to ensure their safety, or we will not have an alliance structure anymore. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, General Gregson. Let me just ask everybody on the panel here just a very quick question, just a 1-minute response would be fine, then we'll get to everybody's Q&A, because I'm sure everybody's got a lot of great questions. Let me start with you, Professor Kim, and we're going to just work our way down. It seems like Libya is sort of the overshadowing this whole thing. A lot of comments about Libya, the Libya model. You know, we had President Trump commenting about it. We had Mike Pence talking about the Libya model on Martha McCallum on Fox News. Obviously, John Bolton talking about it on another Sunday talk show. Do you think the talk about Libya and unilaterally giving up nuclear weapons and then having that sort of getting mixed in with, you know, what happened with Gaddafi later, do you think it's possible that potentially that might have poisoned the well with the North Koreans? What do you think about that? And we'll sort of walk our way down.
Gaddafi was killed because of basically his domestic problems, and also there is a possibility of uprising against the Kim Jong-un and the long run. But for the short period of time, it's almost impossible in North Korea to have that kind of things happening. And then Kim Jong-un seems to be quite confident in controlling the domestic politics. And then also under the limited information and then also their way of lives of North Korean people seems not have their own capacity to uprise against Kim Jong-un at this moment. And then as General mentioned, where and then Kim Jong-un has very tight grip on 1 million people of loyal supporters. And then as long as the Kim Jong-un family kept the supporters, and then they are able to control the whole of the North Korean society. So for the time being, there's no hope.
Anthony, what do you think?
Well, from my perspective, the real question here is whether North Korea has made a strategic decision to denuclearize. If they have not, then it doesn't matter whether it's quick or phased. It's not going to happen. I think that we know now that they have not made that decision. I mean, the question I always have when people criticize the Libya model is, what's your idea? And please don't tell me we're going to do the exact same thing we did re-framework and the joint statement and attempted to do with the deep day deal, because my second question is going to be, what's different? And you're not going to have an answer. So people need to explain that if we accepted North Korea's phased denuclearization, if they're not willing to give up their nuclear weapons up front, what makes you think that in 5, 10, 20 years, I saw someone suggest that it would be the next generation of North Korea, which sounded an awful lot like Kim Jong-un is a Swiss reformed reformer, right? Which turned out not to be the case. So I think when people criticize the Libya model, I turn that around and ask, what's your idea? And I haven't heard a good one yet.
General Gregson, what do you think?
The Libya model hands North Korea a set of interesting talking points. I don't think there was any hope that we were going to get there anyway. North Korea firmly believes that nuclear weapons provide a far more enduring security guarantee than do any statements from the United States.
Professor, can you get a two-finger then? We'll jump to questions.
Okay. Whether we can, apply for the Libyan model or successful, denuclearization of North Korea, it depends upon how we draw cooperation from China. This is the key. So, just with the unitary sanctions or international society efforts, but without Chinese the cooperation, it's very difficult to realize kind of our objectives. So our question is how to draw cooperation from China. This is the key. I really believe. But the problem is South Korean government, especially Moon Jae-in government, paid really special attention to the strengthening the U.S.-ROC alliance at the expense of the relationship with China. And then China also not, there is kind of a trust deficit between the South Korea and China. So China was make kind of assurance from North Korea in the during this process. That's why there was a kind of first and second summit between the China and North Korea. North Korea really good at utilizing that kind of schism, and so North Korea exactly respond to the Chinese apprehension. So there is still space. I think China doesn't want North Korea to be democratized, and also they want to maintain stability. So the problem is how to draw cooperation from China at this point.
Thank you, Professor. So let's move on to the always fun question and answer session. So I would just ask everybody give their name and affiliation up front, just because we are live. We're actually taping right now on Facebook Live. So with that, your questions. Marvin, I had you first, and I'll go around. Please wait for the microphone, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent, no surprise. Marvin Ott, Wilson Center in Johns Hopkins University, formerly federal government. Plenty to suggest this problem is hugely complicated. I want to suggest that it's even more complicated than we're giving it credit for being. And I'm keying on a couple comments that Professor Kim made. And the added complication is China. I attended an event where one of Professor Kim's colleagues made the comment that suspicion and even fear of China is in every Korean's DNA. Now, I would be interested in Professor Kim's comment on that, but if you take the view that Kim Jong-un, like every other Korean, in fact, is deeply suspicious of China, and then factor that into a strategic outlook from Pyongyang, I suggest to you, we don't have time to play it out here, you end up with a very different strategic scenario on the part of North Korea than the one we commonly attribute to him.
Thank you for your comment. And it's not common for the Western people to think about the relationship between China and Korean people. And we lived in adjacent to China for several thousand years, and we know how to deal with. So there's a really deep trust between the China and Korean people, and but we don't want to fight against that kind of huge giant all the time. So we want to be cooperative, but still they don't. We don't want China's extensive influence over the Korean Peninsula. That's why Kim Jong-un really tried to have a better relationship with the United States to some extent, but still there is a trust deficit between these two countries. So they want to have a kind of insurance when they deal with the the United States and South Korea. So we have to think about the kind of differences, and also some spaces in North Koreans, the apprehensions, and then also there's some seeking opportunities. So if we cannot cultivate, and we just continue to force them to follow what we want, but it's extremely difficult. And so that's another point of North Korea to get close to with China. Also, China cultivate that kind of So there is a kind of strategic exchanges of interest between these two countries, China and North Korea. But if we understand the kind of differences and also the apprehension in between these two countries, and maybe we can find certain way out of our customized thinking. So this is my comments.
Thank you. So next I have the gentleman right next to Marta, right in the back. You sir, please.
Hello, thank you so much. What an exciting moment. I'm Guy Taylor from the National Security Editor at the Washington Times newspaper. And there are so many hot questions here. The China stuff is really interesting, but I want to drill into just one little thing. I was in back and forth to Seoul, and I was interested right before the KJU Moon Summit that many advisors around President Moon told me that they were worried about what reaction the government in Pyongyang would have to an American pullout of the Iran nuclear accord. We seem to box things up in Washington foreign policy discussions. This just was 2 weeks ago. Can anybody respond to whether or not there's a connection to the trajectory of things and developments in the last 10 days and the fact that another major policy development from the Trump administration just happened, which was pulling out, and whether or not that is really more important than the Libya deal shenanigans and talk shows, and the extent to which it sent a very clear signal to Pyongyang that if you do business with one American administration, it will be probably gone. That administration will be gone in 3 years, 5 years, and the next administration could decide it wants to do something completely different. Thank you.
Well, I think you raise a great point, and it's, I was partly alluding to that in my comments about we have to wait like wine for a comment to age a bit, but we do not have a great track record lately on adhering to things that we agree with other nations, and that plays into this, and that's why I think Kim Jong-un is convinced that his nuclear weapons are a more enduring security guarantee than anything we can provide to him.
Well, I mean, I would just say, I think we have a tendency to not remember our history. The Obama administration decided to make the Iran nuclear deal an executive agreement. And why did they decide that? Because there was bipartisan opposition in the U.S. Congress to the Iran nuclear deal. So let's be clear that this was not a deal that was overwhelmingly supported by those in the U.S. government. So the suggestion by some, I'm not saying by the questioner, that all of a sudden the Trump administration came through and they were the only opposition is not consistent with history. That's my first comment. The second comment is that, in fact, I think it was a positive development. I think there's always a tendency to say, well, of course, we got out of the Iran deal, so then the North Koreans know that we're not serious. No, I think getting out of the Iran deal, a flawed nuclear-only deal, reminded North Korea that the United States would not be willing to accept the kind of flawed nuclear-only agreements that we negotiated with North Korea in the past. I mean, can we imagine negotiating another flawed nuclear deal with North Korea only to talk about North Korea's political prison camps, or to talk about North Korea's chemical and biological weapons, including their relationship with Syria that is using their chemical weapons on their own population, or their ballistic missile program that they're working with Iran on. So I think we have a long list of things that we can talk about with the Iran nuclear deal. Obviously, this is not the only opinion, and it divides us, but I think we have a tendency to not remember our unfortunately recent history.
Sorry, you right there, then we'll go to Paul.
Elias Grohl with Foreign Policy Magazine. First question for Mr. Kim. I got two, and then we'll go to Mr. Ruggiero. First for Mr. Kim, I'm curious, given that Trump has canceled the summit, what do you think the prospect is for a Korean-led rapprochement with the North? Can they go ahead on their own? And then for Anthony, I'm curious, first off, if you can take on the argument that some advocates of the max pressure campaign have said that was really the reason why the North Koreans came to the table. The typical argument against that is that, well, they actually came to the table because they achieved their goal and they got their nuclear weapon, and so they are seeking to be recognized as a nuclear state, and they're trying to use the negotiating process in order to be recognized. What do you think of that argument? And given that you're advocating for increasing sanctions, pushing forward on this max pressure campaign, so let's say the Trump administration does that and pursues that policy, what comes next? What happens after the Trump administration does this?
Okay. First of all, the South Korean government will continue to, communicate with North Korea to persuade them to come back to the table. And then, except that there is really limited option for the South Korean government if we consider the cost of the other options. And then because Kim Jong-un has a kind of charismatic leadership now, and then inherited by Kim's family, but he needs a kind of achievement to consolidate his power and also get the legitimacy. It is not. It is for the time being it's okay to just possess nuclear weapons, but in the long run, he should achieve something like economic, development and welfare, that kind of. So Kim Jong also fully recognized the kind of problems he faced in the mid to long term. So we can cultivate that kind of opportunities to persuade him, and so we will continue to. But Moon Jae-in government's policy orientation is basically to pay respect to the international society, and we will keep our pace with the development of relationship with North Korea with international societies, and also we will abide by international sanctions. This is the basic orientation of the Moon Jae-in's policies. That's why.
So, I think the maximum pressure campaign certainly was an important element of why North Korea came to the table. I think, the way I look at it is part of what they wanted from the summit diplomacy was an effort to sabotage the maximum pressure campaign. And from my perspective, not necessarily what's happening now, but what would have happened in 6 to 8 months or even longer if the maximum pressure campaign continued and intensified. In my view, revenue that North Korea gets from its commodity sales or other proliferation sales comes back into North Korea and really is used for a variety of reasons. I'd like to focus on 3 of them: for their elites, for their military, and for their weapons programs. And before max pressure really happened, North Korea was able to rank those, and all 3 of those are obviously critical to regime survival. So they were able to rank those 1, A, B, and C. They didn't have to prioritize. I think what the maximum pressure campaign, by squeezing their revenue stream, forced them to rank those 1, 2, and 3. And I think for Kim, he started to realize that could be detrimental to the survival of his regime, and that he needed to make some adjustments. In terms of the whole suggestion that I know the North Koreans are saying this, and people are sort of rushing to believe that North Korea has completed its weapons program. I mean, weapons programs don't just stop; they continue. I mean, I think that North Korea, that's probably part of their propaganda efforts to suggest that they have shifted to their economic part of their dual line. I will say though, if that really is true, then the max pressure campaign can focus in on their economic efforts, which is an area that we have not really looked toward. I think in terms of what comes after max pressure, I think that I'm not sure, where you're going with that question. I think that that's the policy for right now, but I think that, we'll see what happens after that.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of what I'm getting at,
with what comes next in a max pressure campaign, you conceivably arrive at a situation where the United States is instituting something close to a naval blockade on North Korea in order to squeeze the North Korean economy in the way that you're describing. That's historically been interpreted as an act of war, and the max pressure campaign that you're describing seems to be tiptoeing very up to the line of armed conflict with the North Koreans. And I'm curious how you, as an advocate of the max pressure campaign, then consider those kinds of consequences of a max pressure campaign.
Sure, I think that I should have said this during my presentation. I think there are two goals for the maximum pressure campaign, neither of which is the one you described. The first is to basically get North Korea to engage in serious negotiations. I mean, I think based on what we've seen from North Korea over the last week, it's clear that they were not ready. They had not made a strategic decision to denuclearize. And the other, in the absence of that type of negotiation, is to protect ourselves from North Korea's activities, right? Whether it's the missile launches or proliferation in the Middle East or elsewhere. So I'm not sure, I haven't, certainly not in my larger paper, a blockade, but I think that, the question here is whether North Korea is ready to pull back from that brink. And we have to remember that North Korea is the country that is threatening our treaty allies in the region, threatened to, attack Guam or to attack the U.S. homeland. So, and the only country that really has done that in the last, 8 years ago, they sunk a South Korean naval vessel and shelled South Korean islands. So I think that we have to keep that in mind.
Thank you. Paul Saunders, our Executive Director.
Thank you very much, Harry. So I have two questions that follow up on actually the previous two threads that we have been discussing here. The first is Iran and the implications of the withdrawal from the Iran deal. And there's one set of implications related to how the North Koreans think about dealing with the United States. There's another set of implications related to our ability diplomatically to rally other governments to work with us in putting additional pressure on North Korea, including certainly China, also including Russia. We have Russian Ambassador Antonov here, and other governments as well. The second question that I have, it relates to kind of sanctions and maximum pressure and kind of what they can achieve, what they perhaps might not be able to achieve, and domestic implications inside North Korea. Let me explain what I have in mind there. First of all, as I think about sanctions and pressure, I would make a distinction between sanctions and pressure that bring a government to the table and kind of persuade them to engage in negotiation with you, versus sanctions that force a government to take a decision that it views as being kind of a threat to its vital interests. And from my point of view, the threshold you have to hit to get to the second of those two things is far higher. And are we kind of capable unilaterally or in concert with others of applying that level of pressure? But then there's a related question that follows from that. Let's say that we do apply that level of pressure. What is the consequence of that? And certainly there's one consequence, which is the North Korean leadership gives up and they make all the concessions that we want, and they give up their nuclear weapons program, and they
change their domestic arrangements so that that's more satisfying for us. They do all of those things. I can think of, however, a couple of other possibilities. One is that some collection of people inside North Korea are really disgusted with Kim for agreeing to that, and that puts an end to his leadership. And North Korea then goes in a different direction that we cannot really predict. There's another alternative, which is that Kim decides actually that giving in to us isn't his only alternative in getting out of that box. And he follows a policy, and let's kind of look back to U.S. sanctions on Imperial Japan, actually before World War II, which were intended to force Japan to change its behavior and make certain concessions to the United States. And Japan, rather than making those concessions, which the Japanese leadership, I think, viewed as a threat to their continued survival as a leadership, but also to their ability to sustain an independent foreign policy in the future. They decided instead, even though they knew the odds were against them, to kind of provoke a conflict with the United States because they saw that as the less unpleasant of the options before them. Kind of a certain defeat versus maybe not so certain defeat. I'd be very interested in your thoughts on those questions.
Who'd like to go first? Last one back there, obviously. So. Chip, go ahead, please.
Yeah, great presentation, Paul.
Sorry.
Many things are possible, but we have to face the reality of the situation. George Shultz, when he was Secretary of State, famously said that there are problems to be solved and there are matters to be managed. Let me suggest that North Korea is a matter to be managed. And what's important to us? I submit the importance of North Korea to us is the threat North Korea poses to our allies and our friends, and that we ought to, somewhere in this milieu of policy things, prioritize protection of our allies and friends. And this gets into some skillful diplomacy and international relations. Being a fan of maximum pressure sanctions, I would also offer that we need to be more proactive in helping particularly our friends in Southeast Asia to resist North Korean pressure. Recall that Kim Jong-un deployed and employed a weapon of mass destruction to Kuala Lumpur Airport. And being raised in a military tradition, we're taught that VX is the worst of the nerve gases. It's colorless, odorless, persistent. It's a crowd killer. It's a little bit heavier than air, so it settles into low spaces. In other words, they managed to kill Kim Jong-un's brother in what was a very sophisticated application of a very dangerous agent. Besides clearing one plate away from the Kim family dinner table, this also, I submit, served notice to every nation in Southeast Asia that's hosting North Korean laborers that we can reach out and touch you and damage you badly. Maybe this is the reason why the UN sanctions on North Korean laborers gave these countries 2 years to repatriate them. That's not a relevant deterrent timeline with the problem we face here. We have the ability with our investigative agencies and all these things where we can work with willing partners to try and dry up these islands of North Korean criminality existing in Laos, Malaysia, the rest of Southeast Asia, and oh, by the way, Iran, Iraq, and other places. But we can't do it without the willing cooperation of the government concerned, which means we need U.S. credibility to be able to do this. The other thing is looking at specifically at Northeast Asia. You've got Japan right next to North Korea, who are worried about the U.S. making a separate peace over the intercontinental range ballistic missiles. You've got South Korea, who's got their own problems with Kim Jong-un, like I said, having a vastly superior approval rating than does President Trump. We need to take action to really enhance our deterrent capability, not just deterrence by punishment with the threat of annihilation should they ever use these weapons, but deterrence by denial, to be able to deny North Korea the assurance that they can strike Japan. This is possible now at a very low cost. You can look on the Missile Defense Agency website and see what they're looking at about this. But more of the same is not going to cut it. In the denouement of this summit, or not the summit, whatever turns out to happen by June 12th or whatever, the political leadership of the Republic of Korea and Japan and other American allies out there are going to need to have something they can tell their constituents that we're doing something. We collectively as an alliance are doing something to ensure their safety and security. And right now we're not doing it because we're not prioritizing our allies and friends. And this is something we can control. We've had 3 administrations trying to achieve denuclearization with North Korea. We got to face facts that we're probably not going to succeed by July in this. And we need to start doing some things to address that fact and address the safety, security, and the prosperity of our friends and allies in the region and beyond.
Thank you, John. Please, Professor Kim.
We have to think about the much more comprehensive prescription instead of just only military options or security means. Because there is ongoing strategic rivalry between the United States and China, and then also the deepening deficit of trust between China and South Korea gave North Korea space to maneuver. And so that's why North Korea is quite confident now to survive at this moment. And so we have to reduce the kind of kind of space, okay. And also we have to think about how to increase the cost at the regime level, and which is not necessary to be the security related or military related, but it should be comprehensive, economic, political, and diplomatic. And then it means the United States must have quite the skillful diplomacies needed, as the general mentioned. And also maybe we have to think about the role of the third parties. Anyway, North Korea will face tremendous pressure, and then also they have to find a way out. And then, but in the case, how to draw them into the negotiation table. This is the key. We cannot just simply force them to come out or to give up because of the domestic politics. And Kim Jong-un will face an extremely difficult position if it happened. So that's why he cannot come. And so we have to think about all these factors together. And then also by increasing kind of military pressure, maybe you have to think about the cost of the allies and how much the allies can bear that kind of cost, and under Trump administration. So we should be very careful, and then also we need a kind of strategic communications between among allies as well. This is quite important.
Thank you, Professor. Well, since we're slowly starting to run out of time here, I want to ask one question and just have it go around the panel. I think it sort of gets to the heart of the matter. Let's do a little predicting right now. I know that's hard to do, but I think it's sort of useful to see where everybody is. I want to ask the panel, where do you think we'll be with North Korea, let's say 30 days from now, and then go a year from now? I know that's very hard to do, but I kind of want to get a pulse of where we are. So General Gregson, I'm going to ask that to you and we'll work our way down, and I think we'll conclude at that point.
I think we will have a summit meeting within 30 days, or the facsimile of a summit meeting. There'll be a piece of paper signed that can look like we have some kind of agreement. If we're lucky, it'll be an agreement that starts the process, and a year from now, it'll be, as Yogi Berra said, deja vu all over again.
Let me interject. Ambassador, if you had a question, please go ahead.
You said that I don't want to interrupt you because you have just raised the interesting question. It's impossible to answer to it. It should. I consider that all of our panelists are magicians if they are able to answer. If you permit me, I will make some remarks. I would like you to know Russian position in this regard. First, we would like to welcome all efforts of the United States, South Korea, as well as Japan, and our partners from China to get a breakthrough on this issue. We never recognize North Korea as nuclear weapon state. Please, North Korea is our neighbor, and we are very much concerned with the capability to create a problem to the security of the Russian Federation. That's why we were partners during the six-party talk in this regard. We are very much disappointed with the information that Mr. Trump has decided to, I don't know the word, cancel or postpone. Cancel or postpone? Cancel. It was said because I just 6 minutes before cancel. It's a pity. It's a pity because a lot of efforts were used to convene this summit. But if you permit me, I a little disagree with some remarks that you have made and what kind of concerns I have. What I heard today, you're talking just only about pressure. And sometimes I try to make some corrections in your remarks, deleting word North Korea and put Iran, deleting word Iran and put a word Russia. What can we hear today? There is necessity to increase pressure. Where is the diplomacy? You said that it seems to me that what I heard that United States is surrounded by enemies. There is no necessity to invite partners. There is no necessity to invite allies to deal with this issue. I was concerned when I heard a reference to Libya. What can we see now in Libya? Nothing. There is no state as it was during Gaddafi period. What we can see if we look at Syria, we have no unified Syria today. If we look at a map, we will see at least 4 parts of the territory of Syria, and I don't know when we will see unified Syria. By the way, everybody is in favor to see this state unified. You said that I spent a lot of years in negotiations, and frankly, could I say that I know a little how to produce a fruitful summit. Frankly, I don't understand, from just only professional point of view, why North Korea should give up from its nuclear military capabilities. What is the price? We know that this issue in the North Korean constitution, I also can see your smiles that it's very easy to change constitution of North Korea if there is a change, drastic change in a policy. But first, what North Korea wants to get is assurances, guarantee assurances. What kind of assurances they can get? Politically binding or legally binding? You know that all NPT, non-nuclear weapon states, are in favor to get legally binding assurances. But for many years, we have been discussing with them on this issue, and we failed. I mean, P5 countries failed to provide such assurances. So you said, what is the price of assurances that North Korea can get from administration if we look at the situation with the Iranian deal? Today there is a resolution which was supported by all permanent members of P5, and tomorrow one country could decide to withdraw from this resolution, and not clear what will be in the end. So maybe you raised the question that if you disagree with me, what can you offer, how to solve this issue? Till now, I would like to draw your attention to Russian-Chinese proposal. It's so-called double freeze. We have to move to get results by slow steps, as it was mentioned many times by our Chinese colleagues. We are in the United States, but at the same time, I like very much Chinese philosophy to get a great victory by small steps. And it seems to me that we have to understand what kind of carrots we can offer our North Korean colleagues. Please, I would like you to understand me. I don't support North Korean behavior. I don't support North Korean policy. I'm with you regarding the necessity to see Korean Peninsula free of weapons of any time, weapons of mass destruction of any time. Of course, I'm looking at the United States strategic potential that you have decided to deploy there, because it's very close to my boundary. It's very close to my country. And of course, we express our concern in this regard as well. So I consider that it's impossible to increase the security of your country at the expense of the security of another one. And we raised this issue many times with our distinguished American partners. But today, what I see that, to my regret, that United States does not want to see their partners together to deal with all this issue. What I see it is regarding North Korean issue or on Iranian deal. You see that we were members of format 5+1. There is no such format for Iran. And what will be the result? For example, today there was excellent question. If we fail, I mean not the United States, but international community regarding the North Korean issue. So what will be the next step? Military action. What's about Iranian issue? Could we imagine, if there is no result regarding the implementation of Mr. Pompeo's statement, which was made a few days ago, what will be another option? Just only military one. So you see that, as to us again, I would like to sum up and would like you to understand me, that we are in favor to see the Korean Peninsula free of weapons. But we can't see, how to say, multi-faced or multi-layered policy to get result. What I see today, there is just only one proposal to increase pressure, just only maybe to introduce in the future blockade, but there is no diplomacy to end. In this regard, I'm very much concerned. Sorry that they take a little time.
No problem. Thank you, Pastor. Just, we're out of time, so just maybe quick reactions, and then we will call it there. Please, Anthony.
Well, I would just say that, you know, as I predicted earlier, the response to max pressure is more of the same. And the double freeze, I was at the six-party talks. The double freeze is not different than what we saw at the six-party talks. That's the same thing. And I have to be clear that when people say to me that North Korea has completed their nuclear program, or say to me, well, it's in the Constitution, and then at the same time say double freeze, what I'm hearing is, let's recognize North Korea as a nuclear weapons state. And then I ask the question, what happens with Iran? Because I know, as we talk about North Korea, we like to focus in on these silos. You think the leaders in Iran are not going to say, they have nuclear weapons, we want them too? So the suggestion that there's not diplomacy here is interesting given the number of Security Council resolutions, which it would be nice if every country was implementing. I think we have to be focused in on that, would be my approach. And if there's something better than maximum pressure, I'm happy to hear that.
Professor, final thoughts for us today.
In this process, even though we think it's a failure, but for the North Korean perspective, they are quite successful. And they got a lot in the process. They garnered the support from China, and then also they improved the image of Kim Jong-un. And somebody mentioned in Korean and maybe international societies, and then also the loosen the international sanctions, and also as I mentioned, there is kind of structural, factors really help them to survive. So it's extremely difficult for them to give up their nuclear weapons just by forcing them to abide by the international sanctions and other requirements. And then, so North Korea will justify their behavior and also declare maybe success. And also maybe they intensify the relationship with China, maybe and then Russia, and then to enlarge the kind of space for survival for the time being. And then also they will resume the talks with South Korea to maybe further the schism within South Korean government, and then in between the relationship between the South Korea and the United States, and then to get a new opportunity to resume the negotiations. So, but I think there is a kind of chance still to resume the summit in the future, as long as we can, continue continue to have international sanction regimes. But key is how to draw cooperation from China and Russia, and then also how to provide North Korea to have their kind of third way. Still it requires a kind of tremendous efforts, especially led by the United States, and the skillful diplomacies, and also their strategic thinkings. But I do not think this moment the United States has that kind of preparation well. So we have to prepare now, and for the next round of negotiation and also the summit. This is my last recommendation for you. Thank you very much.
I think I'll quote President Trump, "We will see what happens." Thank you, everybody.